As you know, I like to cover true stories, legends, and historical events. There is a subject that is as scary as a horror movie, and for the people who lived through it, it was one of the most terrifying experiences on Earth. This may be your first time hearing about it, and it may be shocking to hear about the white slave trade. The Barbary Pirates were terrorists that thought of anyone not of the Islam religion as infidels. It wasn't about color, it was about religion. They would steal women and children, torture, medicate, brand, experiment, and do things that I can't discuss here. Usually you hear about the black African slaves that were traded in the Western Hemisphere from the 1500s to the 1800s. The numbers are sad. 10 to 13 million Africans were brought as slaves to the New World, the Caribbean islands, and North and South America. It's absolutely crazy. But there was a horrific slavery that we often do not discuss. In fact, in America, it seems almost taboo to say anything or talk about. But the fact is that slavery has been a horrific part of history in every country in the world. It's a sad thing. It's a terrifying thing. It's scarier than any movie you've seen. But ignoring the history of something doesn't make it go away. Did you know slavery is still happening in the world today? I believe being aware of it is a good thing. Most governments ignore the fact that it exists, and they don't propose any solutions because it's not a major concern of theirs. My goal here is to bring awareness, teach you about human atrocities that we as a society should try to prevent at all costs, and to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts and your concerns about the direction the world is headed and where we've been. Today, we're discussing the white slave trade, or the slaves of Europe who weren't Muslim, and the barbaric Barbary Pirates. Hi, I'm Hallow. Welcome to Freaky What. I really appreciate you watching, and if you enjoy this channel, I hope you'll subscribe and watch my other stories. Now, let's get to it. On May 18th, 1803, Britain declared war on France. However, amid the clashes of these empires and the surge of geopolitical tension, a quieter yet much more terrifying narrative persisted, a tale of abduction, captivity, and the lesser-known saga of the Barbary slave trade. As the cannons thundered on the European continent, something else was happening in the Mediterranean. North African Muslim pirates and privateers called corsairs, sanctioned by states such as Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, prowled and terrorized the waters off the coast of northern Africa. These vicious people would perpetrate raids that stretched far beyond the confines of the local shores. These monsters commandeered European merchant vessels, looted their goods, enslaved the crews, and demanded substantial ransoms from the families and governments of those people. Rather than engaging in military confrontation with these piratical states, several affluent European powers opted to offer tributes to the Barbary governments, paying them certain amounts of money for the guaranteed safe passage of their trading ships through the Mediterranean. Unfortunately, as this continued, the main target of these pirates wasn't wealth or territory, but human beings, men, women, and children plucked from their homes, destined for a life of servitude, unnatural acts, and suffering in the distant lands of the Barbary states. This covert trade would go on to be overlooked in the grand scheme of historical conflicts, while etching its mark deep into the collective memory of European societies. While empires clashed and alliances shifted, the Barbary slave trade persisted and grew, becoming a horrifying reality in the Mediterranean seascape. Families lived in constant fear of raids. Entire communities trembled at the thought of loved ones vanishing into the abyss of enslavement, and nations grappled with the diplomatic and economic repercussions of these sinful actions. But what did the Barbary pirates do to slaves that was so horrific?
Battle! Speed!
Well, if you were a strong or healthy man, there was a strong possibility you'd be turned into a galley slave. A galley slave was considered the next most severe punishment after execution. The only way to propel the large ships back then was to organize hundreds or thousands of men to row or by the wind. There was a single large oar per rowing bench. Each oar required 3 to 5 rowers. Some extra large galleys had 7 rowers per oar. Each oar was approximately 12 meters or 13 yards long and weighed 130 kilograms or 286 pounds. Let's assume each oar had 5 rowers. Galleys had 51 oars, 26 on one side and 25 on the other. This meant at least 250 rowers per galley were required. Galley slaves were typically given a biscuit, a cup of soup, and some water for their daily food, if they were given anything at all. The rowers were kept chained to the oar when not doing their other duties, such as sail mending, and were given a uniform consisting of a coarse brown tunic, a vest, 2 shirts, and 2 pairs of canvas breeches. Shoes were only given out for shore duty. One practice that galley slave drivers did institute was to give the rowers as much fresh water as they wanted. See, they realized that slaves died quickly of dehydration, so it was much cheaper to carry vast quantities of water than to replace the slaves. A galley slave usually died within a 10-year period due to many factors: sickness, shipwreck, conditions, dehydration, or other horrific things. If you were a healthy woman, you would most likely be sent to a harem to become a concubine, or you'd be sent to the palace of a sultan to be enjoyed by the powerful and the men with status. The saddest part of humans being traded by the Barbary pirates was the men being castrated so that they would have no lineage or record of their existence. The slave owners didn't want any procreation or children, so most healthy men were castrated. Once the slaves died out, this would prevent any evidence that the Barbary slaves actually existed, which is one reason you don't hear about them much. Across the ocean, Thomas Jefferson became the third president of the United States on March 4th, 1801. Under Jefferson, several things had to be taken care of, such as the U.S. being doubled in size due to the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, the fraudulent Yazoo land controversy in Georgia, the Lewis and Clark expedition launch in 1804, and the issue of slavery. In 1806, Thomas Jefferson stated that the international slave trade was a violation of human rights. Congress agreed and approved an act prohibiting the importation of slaves, which meant slaves were still legal in the U.S., but they could not be carried from Africa anymore. There's something else that Thomas Jefferson did that stands out. He sent men to war against the horrible Barbary Pirates. For several decades, the Barbary Pirates had been brutally attacking foreign and American warships and merchant ships to steal their cargo and take the crews as slaves. The pirates would then demand large ransoms for the release of their prisoners or slaves. In the beginning of these attacks, American ships were protected by Great Britain because we were still with Great Britain. However, after the U.S. declared independence, our ships were no longer protected. Ships were ransacked and crews were turned into prisoners. The Barbary Pirates extended their assaults to the northern Mediterranean coastline, targeting France, Italy, and Sicily. Their primary focus was the abduction of women as white slaves, though they also sought notable wealthy individuals and ships for ransom whenever possible. The pursuit of white women slaves drove some pirates to venture as far as Iceland's coast, raiding inland to abduct women and transport them back to North Africa. Slave markets in North Africa flourished and grew, operating under Sharia, where although fellow Muslims were exempt, non-Muslims were enslaved. It's estimated that 1 million white Europeans, encompassing those captured at sea and through raids on foreign lands, were enslaved over a period of 300 years. Among these captives were many Americans taken while at sea. Congress reacted to the attacks by passing a law which authorized paying tribute to the Barbary states so they wouldn't mess with American ships. The Naval Act of 1794 allowed the U.S. to build or acquire 6 frigates, 4 of 44 guns each and 2 of 36 guns each, to form a navy. Near the end of the 1700s, the U.S. had treaties with Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, the Barbary states, and Morocco. Mustafa Baba, the Dey of Algiers, agreed. However, Jefferson refused to pay tribute. He considered it to be blackmail. 2 weeks before Jefferson became president, Tripoli started attacking U.S. ships to try and get more money. The attacks grew in intensity, and Jefferson had enough. He wrote a letter to Pasha Yusuf Karamanli, the ruler of modern-day Tunisia, and said, "Our sincere desire to cultivate peace and commerce with your subjects." However, Karamanli wanted the tribute and demanded to be paid or continue the attacks. This horrible ruler was currently fighting a war with Sweden over 131 captives, some who were women, as they were very desired as slaves. On May 14, 1801, the ruler of Tunisia declared war on the United States after he chopped down the American consulate flagpole in Tripoli. This was considered a direct act of war. 3 frigates and a schooner under the command of Commodore Richard Dale were immediately sent by Jefferson to protect U.S. ships entering the Mediterranean through the Straits of Gibraltar. Dale's ships blocked several corsairs inside the harbor, which made Yusuf Karamanli a bit angry. Because of this daring move by the U.S., the Barbary trade and raids on Europe came to a halt. However, Tripoli's trade with other Barbary states continued. Slavery continued, even though the United States was having an impact on their pirate business and slave trade. On October of 1803, a frigate called the USS Philadelphia ran aground. 307 men were captured and held for ransom. On February 16, 1804, a group of U.S. Navy men slipped into the Tripoli harbor after dark and set fire to the Philadelphia, destroying it completely. This was to ensure the enemy could not use the ship. In response, Karamanli demanded a huge amount of money in exchange for the 307 prisoners and even threatened death. Jefferson once again had enough. He made the decision to take swift action to stop this madness. A force of 8 U.S. Marines and 500 mercenaries led by former Army Captain William Eaton and Marine Corps First Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon were directed to take Derna and free the hostages. Talk about uniting together. These mercenaries were Arabs, Berbers, and Greeks from Crete, men from all different places. William Eaton did his absolute best to control the undisciplined mercenaries and keep peace. He struggled, but he kept pushing forward. On April 1805, the Battle of Derna was fought and won. Pasha Yusuf Karamanli reluctantly signed a peace treaty on June 10, 1805, aboard the USS Constitution. The treaty granted American ships passage through the Mediterranean without further payments of tribute and freedom from harassment. Finally, it seemed as though the war was over, and so was active slavery from North Africa. No matter what color you are or where you're from, slavery is a horrible thing. If you are black, white, brown, red, or another color, slavery is a horrible thing. It's unfortunate to me that everyone can't agree on the fact that people of all colors and creeds have been persecuted by those who want power, money, and control. It's also unfortunate to me that this is still happening today by people who want power, money, and control. I hope this was an eye-opening episode, because it was for me when I learned about this intense history lesson. As we move forward, I hope that we can all learn lessons from history and help the world not to repeat these horrific events.